This week on Africa Update, we'll take a look at protests happening in Nigeria and Kenya, and of course, other stories on the African continent. You stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back, it's Africa Update, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital, on Trust Television. And I'm your host, Chiamaka Mwafo. There seems to be a protest galore in some countries in Africa. Here in West Africa, Nigeria started their hunger protest slated for August 1st, 2024. Now, the End Bad Governance protest began across the country, garnering significant attention and participation from Nigerians in the Federal Capital Territory. The demonstrations are driven by a variety of grievances against the current administration. Key demands of the protesters include the reduction of fuel prices, the reversion of tertiary education fees, restoration of affordable electricity tariffs, transparency in the salaries and allowances of government officials, the establishment of an emergency fund to support small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, amongst others. TOS TV's Dorcas Yakubu was there and files in this report.
We are hungry!
Nigeria is currently experiencing the commencement of a 10-day protest that began on August 1st, 2024, with citizens demonstrating against economic hardships and government policies. The protest tagged End Bad Governance has seen widespread participation across multiple states, including Lagos, Borno, Kano, Rivers, and the FCT. The protesters have expressed dissatisfaction with the current administration, calling for the restoration of fuel subsidies, reduction of electricity tariffs, and reversal of recent increases in educational and import fees.
We are hungry! My children cannot eat! Beans, 1 mood is 3.5. Oil is 2,000. Gari is 1.5. My children cannot. Yesterday I have to pay for the one I'm holding before and buy another one for my children to eat. I cannot tolerate it anymore.
We don't to suffer for this country. For how long continue to suffer like this? How much our money will get for this country? We just did the suffer for this country. Now we don't tire. A small country like Burkina Faso will set us stand up for that country. We Nigerians will fit one now.
The government should do what we want. They should change. They should bring down the price of fuel. We need our subsidy back. The government should not, the police should not come here to tell us what to do or where to go. We are outside. We want to get to the government and not to the police. So the government should do what we want. Bring back subsidy. Bring back subsidy. And kidnappers. And Boko Haram. Bring back subsidy.
Yes, Nigerians are out to express their fundamental rights as enshrined in Section 40 of the Constitution to assemble, associate, and protect their interests. And the protests have so far been going well, and we are here as lawyers to guide the people and to lead them to carry out their right to protest within the bounds of the law.
In Abuja, the demonstrators have been restricted to the Moshood Abiola National Stadium. This restriction follows a court order issued by Justice Silvanus Origi of the High Court of the Federal Capital Territory. The order was in response to a request from the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, who cited concerns about potential unrest and damage to public property if the protests were allowed to take place elsewhere in the city. This, however, was not obeyed as protesters stormed the central business area in an attempt to enter the Eagle Square. They were, however, met by the intense resistance from security operatives.
As you can see right ahead of me, the security personnel are firing tear gases at the protesters. And the reasons is because they don't want them to exceed that limit. From our own understanding, they don't want them to exceed that limit, and that is why they are firing, the tear gas at the protesters. But then the protesters are unarmed.
The government's response in Abuja has been robust, with heightened security measures aimed at preventing violence. Some arrests were made, while an attempt to arrest a journalist was stopped by the FCT police PRO.
We came here and we are covering the protest, and the Commissioner of Police personally came on. They came down on the journalists, asking us not to cover the protest, and he personally came to me and he collected my phone, and he even asked the police to get me arrested. When I was being taken into the van, some of other journalists and the public relation officer now raised alarm that this is the chairman of NUJ, that I should not be taken away.
Though the situation remains fluid with fears of potential violence, the protests, however, reflect deep-seated frustrations among Nigerians with the current state of governance and economic conditions.
From Nigeria, West Africa, we go to East Africa, where Kenya, recent protests in the country have forced the president to dissolve his cabinet, being led by members of Generation Z, many of whom identify as tribeless and classless. Who are these young protesters? Juma Majanga from VOA reports.
These have been the scenes in the streets of Nairobi and across Kenya for the past 2 months. Young people leading demonstrations to call for good governance. Government data show about 3/4 of Kenya's population is under 35 years old. Experts say for years, Kenya's economic and political structures have not been responsive to young people.
And what they said is they realized there is no one to speak for them.
Most of the protesters are part of Generation Z, born in 1997 and later. The protests were sparked by a contentious tax bill that President William Ruto later withdrew. But protesters say the president has to step down as well. 26-year-old Kasmuel Makoure has been in the forefront of the protests. He says the Ruto must go call is not an attack on Ruto personally, but a call for good governance.
It is the Ruto-isms, the isms that have been associated with him, the corruption that bedevils his government, the cronyism, the sheer incompetence of the people who surround him in government, the sheer number of unconstitutional offices that we've had to endure in his tenure, the extrajudicial killings, the excesses of the police, in a country where we're living, where we have a police force and not a police service. Ruto must go is a clarion call to a better Kenya.
Ruto dissolved his cabinet on July 11 and reconstituted it to include members of the main opposition party. Speaking last week in Mombasa County, he pledged to tackle the main accusation against his government.
I will mobilize resources that are available. I will mobilize every resource that is available to deal with the challenge of corruption.
But critics say the new cabinet, which has half of the fired ministers back in office, does not inspire hope. Recent polls show over 80% of Kenyans support the youth-led protests. Wanjiru says this is because the protesters spoke to the feelings of many Kenyans.
Kenya is in a bad situation. Our political leaders do not reflect our aspirations. And the young people have come and spoken to our aspirations. So really what we are seeing by these shop owners and business owners and parents who are supporting their young people is these young people have captured our aspiration.
Analysts say to bring about real change, the youth-led movement has to organize politically and collaborate with other progressive political groups. Protester Leon Mushiri agrees.
It's high time the young people come together and say that we have identified certain individuals from all over the 47 counties, and we have come together and we're saying that this is the opportunity for us also to go on the ballot come 2027.
President Ruto says the government will not allow further protests in the country, saying, quote, enough is enough. But activists note the right to peaceful protest is guaranteed in the Constitution, and protesters like Mark Ore are defiant. They are planning a major demonstration in Nairobi on August 8th.
Still staying with the protest, still in Kenya though. Attacks, arrests and restrictions on journalists, including over coverage of youth demonstrations, is causing concern among Kenyan media. Journalists are taken to the streets to protest. Juma Majanga again covered the protest and filed this report from Nairobi, Kenya for the VOA.
We are not criminals! We are not criminals!
Journalists march in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, one of several countrywide demonstrations over police attacks on media as they cover youth-led protests.
Basically trying to say we are also opposed to censorship of media. We are opposed to what the government dictates what it wants us to air, but we want to be allowed and given a free space to practice and to ensure that we deliver the news to the people, because we are the fourth estate.
Media freedom is guaranteed under the Constitution, but the Kenya Editors Guild says the government attempts to interfere with that right. Reaction to media coverage of youth-led protests underscores that challenge, says Guild President Zubeida Kananu. Some media organizations are targeted with smear campaigns and threats of license withdrawal, she says. Kananu too has received threatening calls and messages.
They've used all means to create fear among journalists, me being one of them, for calling out the government.
In the past month, the Media Council of Kenya has documented more than 20 press freedom violations by police and protesters. Incidents include arbitrary arrest, assault and threats. K24 journalist Catherine Wanjeri was hit in the leg by rubber bullets despite being clearly visible as press. And parliamentary reporters, including Elizabeth Mutuku of TV47, say they were banned from parliament following coverage of how protesters stormed parliament.
Our greatest mistake, which we did that day, was to show Kenyans exactly what transpired. Some of us have been labeled out as criminals, and we are told that investigations is going on. And our question is, what investigations?
The National Assembly leader denies media were blocked from parliament. A police spokesperson declined to comment to VOA, and calls and messages to government spokesperson went unanswered. That spokesperson has said previously the government has no quarrel with the media. Safety specialists like Media Council's Dina Ondari say the situation is frustrating.
The police who are attacking journalists, unfortunately, are the ones who have a responsibility within the law to arrest the perpetrators of press freedom violations.
Kenya ranked 102 on the World Press Freedom Index, with Reporters Without Borders noting risks for journalists covering politics.
It's really frustrating, that we no longer feel safe in Kenya. We no longer feel at home as journalists in Kenya, because every time you express yourself, you're looking back, watching over your shoulder to see who is following you, who is targeting you.
Kenya has strong laws on press freedom, but media experts say more political goodwill is needed to guarantee rights.
Press freedom is very, very important for us journalists to be able to do our jobs and do it well. Now I'm going to go to Guinea, where a Guinean court on Wednesday sentenced Musa Dadis Camara, a former military ruler, to 20 years in prison after finding him guilty of crimes against humanity. Lawyers for Camara said on Thursday he will appeal his conviction for the crimes against humanity he was given on Wednesday. Here's more from Africa News.
Lawyers for Guinea's former military leader Musa Dadis Camara says he will appeal his conviction on Wednesday for crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison on charges stemming from the 2009 massacre of more than 150 people during a pro-democracy rally in the capital Conakry. Demonstrators at the stadium were protesting against Camara's plans to run for president when soldiers opened fire on them. A court in Guinea has sentenced former military leader Musa Dadis Camara to 20 years in prison after finding him guilty of crimes against humanity. The charges stem from the 2009 massacre of more than 150 people during a pro-democracy rally in the capital Conakry. More than 100 survivors and relatives of victims testified in the trial that started in November 2022. The court said the charges, which included murder, rape, torture and kidnapping, had been reclassified to crimes against humanity. 7 other accused military commanders were found guilty of the same crimes. Camara took power in a coup in 2008 following the death of longtime President Lansana Conté. He fled the country after surviving an assassination attempt not long after the massacre, but returned from exile in September 2022 to face justice, insisting that he was innocent. Lawyers for Guinea's former military leader Moussa Dadis Camara says he will appeal his conviction on Wednesday for crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison on charges stemming from the 2009 massacre of more than 150 people during a pro-democracy rally in the capital Conakry. Demonstrators at the stadium were protesting against Camara's plans to run for president when soldiers opened fire on them. He'd taken power in a coup the previous year. More than 100 survivors and relatives of victims testified in the trial that started in November 2022. Just before the sentencing, the court said the charges, which included murder, rape, torture and kidnapping, had been reclassified to crimes against humanity. Camara's lawyers argued in a statement that during the nearly 2-year trial, he'd not been heard or required to explain the elements constituting the crime against humanity.
When we come back from the break, we'll tell you more what's happening in Sudan, Central Africa, and again, Kenya. Just stay with us. We'll be Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on Africa Update here on Trust Television, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Let's go to Sudan, where the army ruler, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, said his side would not engage in talks with the Rapid Support Forces hours after accusing them of targeting him in a drone strike on Wednesday. Africa News has more for us.
Sudan's army ruler Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said his side would not engage in talks with the Rapid Support Forces hours after he accused them of targeting him in a drone strike in the east of the country on Wednesday. The US has invited both sides to peace talks in Geneva. Burhan said that any peace initiative must recognize his government, also known as the Transitional Sovereign Council, as the legitimate ruler of Sudan. While rejecting talks with the RSF, Burhan expressed his willingness to engage in negotiations with political movements and other armed groups. Burhan was attending a military graduation ceremony when a kamikaze drone struck, killing 5 people. The army said he escaped unhurt. Several mediation efforts have so far failed to produce a lasting ceasefire. Now in its second year, Sudan's war has killed tens of thousands of people and displaced over 10 million. Both sides have been accused of war crimes, including deliberately targeting civilians and blocking humanitarian aid.
The United Nations Security Council on Tuesday unanimously lifted an arms embargo on the Central African Republic. Africa News tells us more.
The United Nations Security Council has unanimously lifted an arms embargo on the Central African Republic. It was imposed in 2013 when mainly Muslim rebels ousted the president, prompting reprisals from mostly Christian militia. The complete lifting of the arms embargo on the Central African Republic is a significant decision as it marks an historic and crucial turning point for peace and stability, not only in the Central African Republic but also for the region. This diplomatic victory constitutes a first step that restores dignity to the country and its people by making Central African diplomacy a model of perseverance and determination in the quest for a fairer, more equitable world and consequently a more peaceful future for all. However, the Security Council called on nations to take all necessary measures to prevent the direct or indirect supply of weapons to armed groups operating in the country. The UN peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic is assisting with preparations for the first local elections in over 36 years, due to take place in October.
Algeria withdrew its ambassador from France after Paris recognized a controversial Moroccan plan to give limited autonomy to Western Sahara under its sovereignty. Here is more.
Algeria has withdrawn its ambassador from France after Paris recognized a controversial Moroccan plan to give limited autonomy to Western Sahara under its sovereignty. French President Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday said in a letter that he saw this as the only way of resolving the long-standing dispute over the former Spanish colony. Morocco claimed authority over the Western Sahara in 1975 and controls most of its territory, while Algeria backs the outlawed Polisario Front, which claims to represent the indigenous Sahrawi people. It wants Western Sahara to be an independent state. France's decision to change its decades-long position on the status of the territory is a major victory for Morocco. Paris joins a growing number of countries that in recent years have backed Rabat's position. But it's a major blow to the Polisario Front, which has slammed France's support for Morocco as a bid to show up its waning influence in Africa.
We head back to Sudan, where the ongoing violence has lasted for more than 15 months, causing significant obstacles to humanitarian aid and leading to famine in parts of North Darfur, particularly in Zamzam IDP camp, south of El Fasher, as reported by the Famine Review Committee, FRC, of the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. Here's more from Africa News.
The ongoing violence in Sudan has lasted for more than 15 months, causing significant obstacle to humanitarian aid and leading to famine in parts of northern Darfur, particularly in Zamzam IDP camp south of El Fasher, as reported by the Famine Review Committee of the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification.
They took everything from the houses, even the beds. People here, they came back, they started coming back to them houses, but unfortunately they don't have anything inside, and even they don't have job because of the war. So we started supplying them with the food.
The World Food Programme is quickly enhancing its emergency effort to save lives in conflict-affected Sudan by boosting the level of aid provided by exploring new, effective methods to deliver urgent support to millions throughout the nation.
Our biggest challenge is the continuation of the conflict, which is hampering our movement as well as our humanitarian supplies. So we call on the parties for an immediate cessation of hostilities that would allow humanitarians to access these communities, some of whom are trapped, and it's very challenging to reach them at this time of the year when the roads are impassable.
So far in 2024, WFP has provided food and cash aid to over 4 million IDPs, refugees and at-risk populations throughout Sudan.
Health-related matters. Kenya and Central African Republic have declared new outbreaks of Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox, as African health officials scramble to stem the spread of the disease in the region, lacking vaccines. Here's more.
Health officials in Africa say that cases of Mpox have surged by 160% in the past year. And they say the risk of the viral illness spreading is high, given the lack of effective treatments or vaccines on the continent. A report released on Wednesday by the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said it has now been detected in 10 countries, adding that the death rate in Africa stands at 3%, much higher than the rest of the world. Mpox spreads via close contact with infected people, including via sex. Earlier this year, the World Health Organization said that despite the ongoing outbreak in Africa and the potential for Mpox to spread internationally, not a single donor dollar had been invested in containing the disease.
And finally, on a very inspiring note, an engineer in Nigeria is aiming to create a new industry for his country with this unique made-in-Nigeria car prototype. Gibson Emeka has this report from Abuja as narrated by Anthony Labruto from the VOA.
Here in the heart of Jos, a city in the north-central region of Nigeria, Jerry Malo's dream of a Nigerian-made vehicle is coming to life. From sketch to prototype, from model to chassis, Malo's cars showcase his homegrown creativity and talent. After studying automotive engineering in London, Malo returned to his native Nigeria in 2017 to chase his boyhood dream of becoming a car manufacturer.
There's almost no vehicle components that we don't have the raw materials within Nigeria or within Africa.
Malo's latest model, the Sternum, is a sports car built to handle Africa's road and power infrastructure issues.
It's a vehicle designed for the African environment. At sport mode, you have just about 3 inches ground clearance, and With a press of a button from your dashboard, it switches to the off-road mode, where you have about 14 inches ground clearance. We also designed inbuilt the vehicles that it stores power that is capable of powering your house.
Nigeria's first domestically made car was the IVM 6490A, launched in 2014 by Innocent Vehicle Manufacturing. As an emerging economy, Nigeria's automotive industry relies heavily on imports. Homegrown brands are good for the entire country, says Abuja-based development economist Hawa Mustafa.
While jobs are being created, skills are also going to be upgraded. In fact, we are also going to have opportunities for new skills.
Automobile expert Joshua Samuel says a local auto industry can help other industries improve. For instance, revamping the huge but idle Ajokuta steel plant could boost the supply of raw materials to manufacturers like Malo.
If Ajokuta start working, just imagine, irons are wonderfully. You will get irons that you can just mold it to your own specification because it's your country. You see, when you have robust industries in the country, as automobile, what do I need an old car for?
But it's still early days for Malo and his cars. His project faces big challenges like limited research resources and funding. Malo launched the Benny Sternum in February 2024 and is still waiting for the funds to get the product to the market. But Malo and his team of 50 young innovators believe their journey is about more than just building cars. It's about creating a future where Nigeria's engineering capabilities can thrive and lead.
Quite an inspiring one there. And just as you can see, if that were to work, other things in the country could work. Ajakuta Steel, for example. That's the much we have for you today on Africa Update. To see you same time, same place next week. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. I am Chiamaka Mwafo. Bye for now.